Hello students, this is Mr. Miller from West Mecklenburg High School, World History teacher, and this is your Unit 3 review video. So one thing you could do while you're studying for your Unit 3 test is go in and try to watch this video a few times, go over your study guide with at home, and along with that maybe create some flashcards and other things to prepare for your Unit 3 test. Alright, your Unit 3 test. So let's go on and get started on it. Alright. So the first thing we talked about in Unit 3 was related to the last thing we talked about in Unit 2, which was the Crusades. So the Renaissance started in Europe in 1300. All right, this was a rebirth of Greek and Roman learning and culture in Europe. So remember that you have the Greeks, you have the Romans, and their life was great in Europe. But then when the Roman Empire fell, kind of sort of everything else, and then the Western Europe, most of Europe, turned into just a terrible place to live. All right, the Renaissance is this rebirth. Renaissance literally means rebirth of Greek and Roman learning and culture in Europe. All right, so this had some causes, of course, and some effects. So some causes, you have increased trade from the Crusades, which caused Europe, specifically in Italy, to become rich. All right, so the reason why I said specifically in Italy was because if you look here at this picture, you can kind of see Italy. This is Italy, and this is the rest of Europe. Italy is on the Mediterranean Sea. All right, so because of Italy's location to the Mediterranean Sea, it was very good when it comes to trading, and it did very well when it came to trading. So because that, Italy became very, very rich. And what happened whenever Italy became very, very rich? Well, they were allowed for being able to fund more art and learning, and you were able to have more money for art and learning. So people were able to invest in art and learning and invest in pretty much just Renaissance ideas. So along with the money, you also have the spread. So one of the other causes is the fact that you have culture spreading, cultural diffusion happens. So the culture of the Renaissance, this Greek and Roman learning, spread because of the printing press. All right, the printing press, which makes copies of books and copies of things and manuscripts and documents, made it easier to get the Greek and Roman learning and spread it across all of Europe. Okay, so those are like the causes of what happened with the Renaissance. Now the effects, first of all, effect is you have an increase in humanism. Humanism is this belief that we should focus on more on individuals rather than on groups. You should focus on the human. It's not the humans, the human, the individual, right? We should focus on what makes us special and overall human achievement, and not focus on necessarily on trying to get groups to do things and manipulate groups. What we're going to do is focus on individuals and their achievements. Now, another thing that was a big effect was an increase in what we call secularism. Now, secular means worldly. So basically, it's ultimately a focus less on religious things. So remember that the Dark Ages, before the Renaissance, we talked about, was very, very, very much religious. Super religious. Jesus was a very big deal. In the Renaissance, Jesus is still a big deal, but people are increasingly becoming less religious. And they're increasingly focusing on themselves rather than the church and what the church wants them to conform to in their group. They focus on themselves and individuals, and they're also focusing less on religious things. And these are some of the causes and effects of the Renaissance. Now, some key figures, big important people. You have one important figure, Michelangelo. Michelangelo was a painter. He painted the Sistine Chapel. If you wanted to go and click on that, I'm not going to because it takes up a lot of space and like bandwidth. But Michelangelo is a famous painter from the Renaissance. He created the Sistine Chapel, which pretty much is the most expensive picture book of the Bible put on the roof of a church. Very, very amazing. I will click on that on your whenever you have the chance. Along with that, you also have Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci, who is also, both these guys are from Italy, right? Leonardo is not just a painter. He's an inventor. He's an artist. He's an architect. All right, inventor, artist, architect. He is what we call a Renaissance man. Now, what is a Renaissance man, you might ask? A Renaissance man is a person who has many different talents. He has many different talents, and he used those talents to kind of, explore the world. So Leonardo created designs for helicopters and tanks, right? He dissected animals and studied anatomy. He painted The Last Supper, which is all of Jesus and his disciples and apostles on the last night before he died, right? So these are all things in which Leonardo did. And of course, you see how it had many different skills. That's what a Renaissance man is. Somebody who has many different skills, and Leonardo kind of embodied the Renaissance. When you think Renaissance, you think of Leonardo da Vinci. Now, along with that, you also have Gutenberg. Now, Gutenberg was creator of the printing press. His full name was Johannes Gutenberg, but Gutenberg is kind of how we recognize him. And he's the creator of the printing press, which we remember, the printing press, this is the printing press right here, helped spread ideas. Now, along with helping spread ideas, one of the big ideas at the time period was the Bible. So Gutenberg actually printed off the Bible in what we call the vernacular, or the common language, the language that everybody use in their day-to-day life. Okay, so him printing the Bible in the common language helped spread the idea of the Bible, and everyday people can now read and interpret the Bible for themselves instead of depending on their priests telling them what the Bible says. They can read for themselves, and we're going to talk a little bit about those effects later on in this presentation. Now, along with that, our last Renaissance figure is Machiavelli, and he wrote The Prince, which is a book on how to lead. All right, he believed that leaders should do everything in their power to keep power, that you should use any means needed in order to keep your power, right? And even if it takes being cruel or being tough, you have to do that because that's what leaders do. And Machiavelli, if you look here, one of the famous quotes, "It is better to be feared than loved." That's like kind of his whole thing that he's remembered for. He's remembered for saying that quote and saying, people oftentimes take advantage of people if they know that they're super nice. Okay, they take advantage of people if they know that they're like super easy pushover. All right. However, they do respond to fear, and he said that it is much better to be feared than loved because I can control this. I don't necessarily control how people react whenever I try to get them to like me as a person and as a leader and be their buddy and friend. Okay, so those are our big major figures. We're going to re-loop a little bit. Humanism, big concept. Renaissance philosophy. Hold on, stop. Focus on the individual, right? When you think of humanism, think of the human, right? Another big major figure, hint, wink, nudge, right? The Renaissance figure, Machiavelli, who wrote The Prince, and talking about better to be feared than loved. So overall overview, summary of the Renaissance. Causes: increased trade that resulted from the Crusade. Italy was in the middle of the Mediterranean, very strategic position for the increase in trade, and this created a wealthy leisure class. By wealthy leisure class, we're talking about people who have free time. These people are called patrons. So you're able to have patrons in order to be able to fund art. Okay. Now, along with that event, you have a rebirth of learning. You have a renewed interest in humanism. Along with that, you also have big major figures: Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Niccolo Machiavelli. And another big effect, you have great works of art and advancements in science, the Sistine Chapel, invention of the printing press, but ultimately you have Western Europe being brought out of the Dark Ages, out of the Middle Ages. Okay, so after the Renaissance, what we talked about the Protestant Reformation. So when we talk about Protestant Reformation, our keywords are protest and reform, right? So we talk about this is a protest of change. We understand that the Protestant Reformation was changes people wanted specifically for the church. Okay, so our big causes. You have the church sold pieces of paper called indulgences. All right, they were trying to sell indulgences, these pieces of paper, to raise money. Now the church said that this piece of paper made it easier for people to get into heaven. All right, that's what the church was saying to people. So people, of course, were buying these tickets so they can get into heaven easier. Now, a German monk, Martin Luther, definitely opposed this idea. He thought it was terrible that people thought they could buy their way into heaven. He thought that heaven was a place for anybody who just believed in Jesus. So Martin Luther popped off, started the Protestant Reformation in 1517 when he posted the 95 Theses, where he protested the selling of indulgences, but more so, he protests the power of the church. He's protesting, saying the church can't do this. And this is a big deal because the church, as we talked about before in Unit 2, is the strongest, most powerful group organization at the time period. So this is a very bold move, all right? Now, along with Martin Luther not liking necessarily the church, the monarchs, the kings and queens, did not necessarily want the church to have power either. They wanted more power because they thought the church had too much power and the church was being corrupt. And them being kings and queens, they want to be able to eventually run things. So you understand that they probably had a problem with this power that was displayed from the church. All right, now effects that happen. Some effects. Before we get into the big people, talking about the effects. Effects, people challenge the church power. They challenged church power and they created their own churches, their own denomination of churches, all right, that sprang up. So this is how we get different types of churches like Presbyterian, AME Zion, Baptist, Methodist. These are all things that come about because of the Protestant Reformation, all right? This protest to change, people change the way churches looked. The power of the Catholic Church decreased, right? Because less people were going to these churches because they were starting their own church. So the power of the Catholic Church decreased. But along with that, you have the end of religious unity in Europe. No longer is Europe unified. Instead, Europe is divided among many different Christian factions. And this leads into violence because people are fighting for what they believe. All right, and they're trying to also get people to believe in what they believe. So you see here, you get lots of violence happening in Europe to get people to believe what you believe. All right, believe the church you're saying is the right church. Now, some big things, kind of recapping of some things. Indulgences. So remember, big things, indulgences are pieces of paper that were granted by the Catholic Church, granted people time from purgatory. I.e., purgatory was kind of this middle place between heaven and hell, and people didn't want to be in purgatory. They wanted to get in heaven. So basically, indulgences was a way for people to get into heaven quicker. All right, that's what the church said. And this is an example of like a church official selling indulgences to a person, right? And to understanding kind of where this all started. So indulgences were happening, and Martin Luther, who was the leader of the Protestant Reformation, he thought this was terrible. You can kind of see him giving side eye right there. He's thinking this is some fishy business. He wanted to reform the church and end the selling of indulgences. So remember that reform means change. You're reforming something. So he wanted to change the church because he was wanting to stop the selling of indulgences. And he said this change within his 95 Theses. So the 95 Theses is written by Martin Luther. This is 95 problems, 95 arguments that Martin Luther has with the Roman Catholic Church. He takes these 95 problems and he nails them to the church door so that the Catholic Church kind of puts them on blast saying, these are the problems I have with you. I'm not afraid of you. This is what it is, and this is what it's going to come down to. We're going to have some changes or we're going to have some problems. Have some changes, have some problems. And of course, you probably saw from the violence, right, that there were many problems that came about, okay? Now, you might be wondering, when we talk about the printing press, why are we talking about the printing press again? The printing press is important because it allows for these ideas of both the Renaissance and the Protestant Reformation to spread, all right? Is able to spread these ideas. So Gutenberg is able to spread, Martin Luther is able to spread his ideas of the Protestant Reformation. The Renaissance is able to spread humanism, and ultimately literacy increases because if you have more books, you're going to have more people reading, and more people reading means you're going to have an increase of literacy because literacy means reading, the ability to read. Being literate means I have the ability to read, like off this slide. Now, Protestant Reformation. Just a quick summary of the Protestant Reformation. Causes: the Roman Catholic Church had to obtain an incredible amount of money, power, all right, and money. And people were not liking that. Kings and princes wanted more power for themselves and less power for the church because the Roman Catholic Church had so much power. Pair that with the fact that Martin Luther had issue with the church, things started popping off real fast. Important people and events: Martin Luther, of course, also John Tetzel. All right, sold indulgences. Then you have the nailing of the 9-5 Theses. Effects: end of unity, many new nominations, power of the Catholic Church decreases. That is the Protestant Reformation.